Alright guys, welcome back. So if I press play, you see that we can punch, and that's brilliant. It's cool. And we can obviously run and punch, and we can walk and punch too. So it's pretty cool, and you guys can play with the interpolation values to make this a little more smoother. As you can see, the legs are still in motion as the punch is done. That's just playing with the interpolation values. Eventually you guys will get it perfectly right. Now, I'm more interested in trying to make sure that the punch actually deals some damage, or at least generate some hit events. Right, so what I'm going to do first is just to play around with this. Let's take a cube, right? Let's bring this up, and let's create a punching bag for this, right? And let's change this material to maybe just some basic material, right? So I have this, and as you can see, my hand just goes through it. Right? Nothing's happening because my hand is going through it. But let's change that, right? Let's do our simulate physics. And if you guys have been following with the landscaping tutorial parts, you know what simulate physics does. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to save this level as level 1. I totally forgot to save the level. I'm going to press play. As you can see, because this physics is simulated, it fell on the floor. Now watch this, okay? You see? Nothing's happening. Whereas if I put my body into it, then it moves. And the reason for this, the reason that punching it is not generating any physics events, or punching it is not moving it, is because we need to look in the third person character, and in our viewport, we'll realize that the only collision this player has is this capsule component. However, when this player punches, the capsule component, it goes outside the capsule component. So his left hand, and we know that the punching happens with the left hand, it goes outside the capsule component. So obviously it's not going to generate any events. So what we need to do is we need to add a new component to the mesh which has collision for his left hand. So I'm going to click on add component. I'm going to choose sphere collision, right? And I am going to call this left collision. Let's call it left collision, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that it's parented to the mesh, right? Let me do that. So it's going to move along with the mesh whenever the mesh moves. However, it's still not attached to the left hand, right? So when you move your hand out to punch, this thing is going to stay here wherever it is, right? Even if I move this up, it's just going to stay there. So how do we actually attach this collision to the left hand? We do that using the construction script. So far, we haven't touched the construction script. We've used the viewport, we've used the event graph, but we've never actually used the construction script. Right? So construction script, in this case, we are going to use to set up the character before it starts. And that's the use of a construction script. It's used to spawn components and do other setup. So right now, we're going to do some setup. First thing we're going to do is pull this left collision here, right? And we're going to use something called attach to component, right? And now there are two attached to components. One is a target is actor, and one is a target is scene component. Now these are all scene components, right? So we're just going to use the second one, which is target is scene component, right? So what I want to do is attach this collision, left collision, to a parent, which is the mesh, right? So I'm going to pull the mesh, and I want these to be attached, and I want it to be attached at a particular place. I want it to be attached at this hand. How do we know what the socket name for this hand is? So to do that, we're going to open our character, Deliman. We're going to go into his entire skeleton tree, and we're going to find a nice bone where we can have this magic happen. I think, yeah, left hand middle one is a good bone. So right click, copy selected bone names, and we will just, in the construction script, we will use that as the bone name, as a socket name. All right, so that should be good enough. Keep everything else as keep relative. Should be good. And now if you go back, you'll see that it has been attached to his hand. However, I do think this is a little too big, so let me make this a little smaller. You should always keep it a little bigger than the hand itself, because otherwise sometimes the player will hit something, or he thinks he hit something, and because the collision sphere is too small, the player gets irritated and says, well, this game doesn't work properly. I hit the enemy, but the hit didn't get registered. So make sure the collision box is slightly bigger than you give it credit for. So Compiling, saving, and this should work pretty well, but I also want to play with the collision a little bit. Remember, there are two kinds of collisions, and we've gone through this, in the beginning of our blueprints. There are collisions and there are hits, right? And we want this to be an event hit, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to drag this. Simulation generates hit events. I definitely want that. And can characters step up on this collision box? Definitely not. You shouldn't be able to step up on your own hand. It doesn't make sense. And the collision preset, instead of overlap all dynamic, we're going to change this to block all dynamic, which means it will not overlap over something. If it finds another solid object, it will generate a hit event. So compile, save, and this should be good enough. So as you can see, we're punching. Let's go close by. Bam! Our punching bag works, or our punching block works. Cool, guys. So, that's about it for this episode. In the next episode, we're going to learn how to actually deal some damage to that box, and more on punching in the next one. Bye-bye.